I studied the guidebook on the train as Rebecca and I were traveling from Nice, France to Genoa, Italy, the beginning of a 3-week journey through Europe that was part of a spring break during our semester abroad in undergrad. In our guidebook, there was a section at the back that gave you some key phrases in different languages of different European countries that might help you to navigate the territory. And since we were leaving France and we were heading to Italy, I was practicing those phrases on the train, particularly the phrase, "Where is," in the name of our hostel. You see, we'd been told that Italian people are friendly and helpful. That was sort of in contrast to the stereotype that the guidebook said about people from France. And so we knew that we could ask for help and they would offer it. So when we got off the train in Genoa and we walked out onto the plaza there, we found a nice, friendly, and helpful Italian person. I approached him, and with the phrase I learned on the train, I said, "Where is," in the name of our hostel. But I spoke to him in Italian. So he presumed that I understood the language I had just spoken. And so, being friendly and helpful, he gave us a very detailed description of how to get to our hostel. He obviously knew where it was. He talked for what felt like 15 minutes. It was probably 20 seconds, but he gave us every detail we needed. Street names, left turns, right turns, landmarks to look for, parts of town to stay away from. And when he finally finished speaking and he smiled, we replied, "Grazie," and he walked off, and I turned toward Rebecca and I said, "So, what do we do now?" And luckily, we were in Italy, and Italian people talk with their hands. That can be evidenced by 2 Italian women we have on staff now. And so Rebecca said, "Well, the first direction he pointed was that way, so let's try that to begin with." So we had our map in the guidebook. We had these very detailed directions that we didn't understand, and we had faith that we would eventually arrive in our destination, so we took off. Now, we were lucky. We had a map. We had a reservation at our hostel. We had a backpack and a suitcase full of clothes and toiletries, and as a last resort, we could always call our parents. They would be willing to pay the exorbitant international rates to help us make sure that we were safe. We made our way, but it was a challenge. The streets of Genoa are winding. There are some very sharp switchbacks. The buses come around those really fast on these cobblestone streets, but we made it and eventually arrived at our destination. I remember that time still all these years later as a journey of uncertainty and insecurity, but that was nothing compared to the journey we hear about with Abram and Sarah today. God calls Abram, "Go," is the command, but there's no map. There's no guidebook with some helpful phrases to help get around. No reservations. Not even a declared destination where they're going. Just go. Oh, we hear what Abram's going to lose when he goes on the journey. He loses his country, the people of Haran, his knowledge of place names and streets, the stories that bind him to his fellow citizens, the geography of the familiar. He loses his family. The old home place, the memories of birthday parties, going to grandma's for dinner, fights with brothers and sisters, visits to the cemetery to bury the dead, and the old family plot. He loses his father's house. Just before this story, we hear that Terah, Abram's father, has died. Abram has just buried him. Together, he and his father had come to what they called Haran. His brother, Haran, had died back in Ur. They'd buried him. Terah and Abram came and named their new home Haran after the brother who had died. But he was going to leave that now. Even though fathers were to be honored, even after their death, they're not to be abandoned. But the call comes, "Go." This call of Abram is new in the Genesis story. It reveals the relationship of God to the people that God calls, and that's going to be a relationship through travel, a relationship of journeying. Go. God's on the move, and God works through a people who are on the move. Versions of this same call and journey story repeat themselves throughout the Hebrew Bible, where there's no itinerary, sometimes there's not even a final destination. We're going to be exploring some of those stories over the next several weeks. We're going to call this series Finding Our Way. Part of the reason that we're doing this, looking at these stories, is because many of us have felt the strain of loss and uncertainty in our own lives over the last 6 months. We feel like we've been thrust out of what we knew to be a reliable life into a journey where we don't think we can see the ending, where the GPS won't give us reliable directions. We don't even have a map. Abram, when this journey of uncertainty begins, he loses his country, he loses his kindred, he loses his father's house. What is it that we've lost during these months of the COVID pandemic? I'll tell you some of the things that we've lost. A spring break trip to London that Simon was supposed to take with his grandparents in March. A Little League season. Ballet lessons. Cub Scouts. Exercising at the gym. Having people over for dinner. Going on a date and leaving the kids with a babysitter. Working from an office. Dropping off a kindergartner for the first day of school. Running out to the store real quick just to pick something up. Scheduling an appointment to get your hair cut or your teeth cleaned without fear and trembling. Since many of us have been able to be together in regular ways, we have a toddler now who wasn't even walking the last time you saw her. She talks now too, and she can use a spoon. And I know that those are superficial losses compared to those who've lost loved ones, those who've lost jobs. But they're still real. It's still disruptive because these rhythms, these routines, these things we value, they make up our days, and those days make up our life. They give us direction and purpose. There have been other losses too. We've had 8 deaths in our congregation over the time of this pandemic, none of them directly caused by COVID-19. All of them senior adults living in care facilities or homebound, now more limited than ever in terms of who can come and see them, family, friends, church members, pastors, caregivers. Death from loneliness. Those funerals then have been restricted. Just family, maybe a few closest friends, not singing hymns for healing. For still others, there have been loss of prom, graduation, Montreat youth conference. And for some, they tried to go to college, move in, freshman year, COVID outbreaks, dorms shut down, online classes, quarantine. Others, summer trips, camps for the family, doing back to school shopping, new shoes, a new outfit for the first day of school. Play dates and preschool. For those in their 70s or 80s, when was the last time you interacted with a baby, with a toddler, or went to garden club or to book club? Today's supposed to be rally day, the big pep rally in the life of the church. Remember that? Scratch biscuit in the fellowship hall, introducing Sunday school teachers, sending kids off to their new classes for the year, youth group kickoff tonight with games in the fellowship hall, Wednesday night suppers beginning with choir rehearsal afterward, small groups and prayer groups gathering at various times in the church throughout the week, 95 preschoolers parading in every morning at 9 a.m., AA meetings, Al-Anon Scouts, the neighborhood association using the facility in the evenings, along with all the committee meetings and board meetings of the church. I'll tell you, one of my greatest joys of these past 5 years together is to see how we've continued to mature as a community of faith that doesn't just accomplish church, come to worship, check, give my offering, check, do some service hours, check, but to become a community that actually lives alongside and walks alongside one another. And that's taken a lot of work and planning and prep. I know it's simple things, but it's stuff like dinner groups and a softball team, a congregational retreat, the Montreat Worship and Music Conference, the Montreat College Conference, places where we can build these deep and formative relationships, organized work, turning in checks, getting forms filled out, packing suitcases. Pandemic comes and poof, it's all gone. Can't be done that way anymore. Thrust from the familiar into the wilderness. Go. But maybe Abram and Sarah can show us something about how we navigate a journey of uncertainty that we don't know how long it's going to last or where the destination ultimately is. Because not only do we hear in these verses today what they're going to lose when they leave Haran, we also hear a promise. But to get to the promise, we first have to know the premise behind that promise. And that comes at the end of chapter 11 of Genesis. It's a one-verse sentence. It's quite short. Now, Sarah was barren. She had no child. 75-year-old man. Family with no progeny, which means no future. Barrenness. This is the family God calls out to. This is the family God chooses to bless. You heard it. With the command, there comes this promise. I will make of you a great nation. You'll have a great name. You will be blessed from God to be a blessing to the nations. Command and promise, but an impossible promise. A great nation. From two senior adults who've never painted a nursery or assembled a crib. A great name for a people who is going to be leaving the land and the heritage that they've known. A blessing to all the earth when they have to give up all of their possessions in Haran. The miracle and the model of Abram and Sarah is that they go. The command comes in the midst of barrenness, when there's no reason to hope, with the risk of all that can be lost, with just this impossible promise, and Abram and Sarah obey. They go. Old Testament scholar Walter Brueggemann reminds us that the purpose of the call is to fashion an alternative community in creation gone awry, to embody in human history the power of the blessing. It is the hope of God that in this new family, all human history can be brought to the unity and harmony intended by the one who calls. An alternative community of blessing in creation gone awry. A call to a people in the midst of barrenness, in the midst of brokenness, who've got no map or GPS, who know they can't just do things the way they've always done them before, a people who step out when the securities of the past are gone and the future seems impossible to be realized. It's a trust in the promise despite all of that. So you start having worship at 9 and 11. You have Wednesday communion outside in the columbarium. You get children's worship going outdoors. You have small groups that gather with masks on or over Zoom or out in the parking lot. God Alive gets together and hikes in the woods. We have open door prayers on Tuesdays for people to come in the sanctuary, sit in the quiet, a moment of respite with God. A Thursday night live-streamed prayer service where we will raise up the concerns of our neighborhood and of our people. Handbells with extra space between ringers. Extra mission monies raised for our mission partners who are now becoming virtual learning centers. Calling an associate pastor in the middle of a pandemic, moving her here, and she has to learn all of your names based on the upper half of your faces only. And y'all won't believe it, but we have new people who want to join the church. Right now, they're going to be a class. That's nuts. That's impossible. And then today we're going to ordain and install new elders and deacons. Men and women called out of what they know and into the wilderness of these days, who are going to guide us, discern God's will with us, trudge the path, lead by faith. Because whatever the day, the command and the promise remain. So, church, we're going to have to dig down deep. And I'm not talking about digging down deep in ourselves, because we know that on our own we are just barren. No, to dig deeply into God, following the command, trusting the promise. If you're somebody who feels like you've just kind of been sleepwalking through your faith, it's just a rhythm, it's just a routine, it's just something I do, please, friends, now is the time to wake up. Now is the time to ask, can I step into the challenge of the blessing? Is the command more powerful than those other voices that are telling me all the time, just chill out, just calm down, just turn in on yourself? Because, brothers and sisters, we are the ones who are called to go, who are called to bless, to be this alternative community in creation gone awry. We're the people of care when those around us have become hyper-legalistic about COVID-19 restrictions or lack of restrictions. We're the people of peace when acts of violence erupt in our community or in our nation or around the world. We are the people of reconciliation when a presidential election pushes people to the worst of their polarities. To pray, to study, to love, to give. We don't have a map. The GPS just keeps repeating over and over again, recalculating, recalculating, recalculating. We're in a foreign land where we don't know the language, the mountains are steep and the switchbacks are sharp, and yet we are the ones who are called to keep going, to keep blessing, because that's what we do. To step out and trust the promise, even when we can't see the evidence that the promise will be fulfilled. You know what we call that? We call that faith. And we've seen from Abram and Sarah onward that the promise of God is trustworthy. God is faithful still. So ready, set,